Good evening. I'm Mike Beckett. I'm with MD Alignment Service here in Des Moines, Iowa. I run this mobile heavy truck alignment operation. Over the years, I got frustrated with alignment machines that wouldn't set trucks up the way I thought they ought to be, so I reverted to strings and tape measures in order to get the job done. We've now get good results out of the tires, and it's just not giving us any problems. A couple of years ago, the Iowa Motor Truck Association talked me into doing some training programs and into writing a book on how we do alignment so they can do their own. Now, the book's been doing real well, but people have asked us to do a video for it because they have a hard time imagining exactly how we're setting these trucks up. Hello there. Uh-oh. We're turning into a Hollywood operation here. Let's see. Am I beautiful? Oh, I guess not. All right. In either case, the system works fine, and we'll discuss with you how we do the measurements and what we use. We're going to show you toe, caster, camber, steering axle setback, thrust angle, how to tram the drive axles, and how to make sure the drive axles are centered underneath the truck. In order to measure the truck, there's certain tools that you're going to need. We brought along a toolkit to show you what's involved. We use a couple of shorter tape measures, 12s or 20 footers, and the 3/4 inch width. I prefer the lever lock tape measure because it retracts slower. If you use a conventional snap lock tape measure, it retracts so fast that it'll pop the ends off. We also have times when we need a longer tape measure, so we usually keep a 25-footer around for longer jobs. In order to measure angles for caster and camber, you can use this $9 indicator, which you can buy at Sears or at the other tool suppliers. Or if you've got old eyes like I do and you can't read that little needle, you can get a digital protractor for about $200. Either one will do the job for you. A piece of string attached to a spool allows you to measure the thrust angles. And when you're measuring under the truck to measure caster, there's times that a piece of 1-inch bar stock will come in handy. We'll show you where that's used later on. The only thing that you can't just simply pick up off the shelf are going to be these two straight edges. You can make these yourselves. They're described in the book. They use 1 by 2 inch aluminum channel. They're about 44 inches long, and they have hooks. We use just fish hooks and knock the barbs off, some chain and some bolts. In addition to that, we cut a couple slots in the ends of the bars so that you can hook the tape measures in. With 2 bars, 2 tapes, string, protractor, and a piece of bar stock, you can do all the measuring on your truck and trailer that's required. In order to do this, in addition to the tools, we need a facility and a vehicle to work on. BTI Special Commodities is allowing us to use theirs. Dan Mitchell is the maintenance manager for BTI Special Commodities, and I've asked him to come by and tell a little bit about his experiences with the MD alignment system. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Mike. MD Alignment's been doing our alignments in 1993. Since MD's been doing them, we've had higher tire life and less driver complaints. And as long as Mike's available to do them, MD Alignment will be doing our alignments.
Well, I thank you for that vote of confidence. We'll try to take care of them for you.
You're welcome.
All right. In the meantime, we have to show you what's involved in doing the alignments and what tools we use. The alignment requires that the vehicle be set up properly before you do the alignment. In order to do that, we have to drive the vehicle into the stall straight ahead and roll it to a stop. This allows the tires to set themselves in the same position they're in when they're driving down the road. Now, all trucks, brand new or used, have a certain amount of play in the front end components, in the tie rod end joints and the wheel bearings or whatever. The scrub on the tire sets that tire in the same position that it drives in. Now, most conventional alignment machines, when you put it on the machine, the first thing they do is jack the vehicle up, mount some instruments, and set the vehicle back down on some free turning pads. Well, this releases the drag, and you're measuring the vehicle in an artificial condition, so you get artificial readings. We found that by measuring the vehicle in its position when it drives into the shop, we get a better tow reading. Now, the tow system we use to measure it does not require that we jack the vehicle up. All right, in order to do the alignments, we need the 2 bars and we need the 2 tape measures. Somebody know where my tape measure is?
Here, are you looking for this, mister?
Oh, gremlins. All right, how's it going, Kale? All right, we put 1 tape measure across and the second tape measure. Then take the bar that has the two hooks and chains on it. And we'll set this up on the right side on the right front tire. Then coming back around this side, take the other bar, place it across the bottom of the tire, above the bulge in the tire, but below any rim obstructions. Your knee against it, take the two tape measures, and we're going to bump them up against the other tire. Make sure we got a good solid contact. We got a 92 and 11/16 and a 92 and 3/4. Which gives us a 1/16 inch toe in. Well, that's about where we want it, isn't it, Dan?
Yes, it is. Seems pretty simple.
It is pretty simple. Now the question is, when was this truck aligned the last time?
98,000 miles ago.
And the toe hasn't changed.
Nope.
What does the depth on these tires say?
There's 12/32 remaining.
So they started with 18/32. They've used 6. Looks like this tire is going to go over 200,000 miles.
Apparently so.
That's not bad alignment. For our purposes here, I need you to imagine that this is a spoke rim. Now you understand that with spoke rims, they don't mount up straight on the sidewall of the tire. And because of that, you can't use the bars measuring off the sidewalls to get a good measurement. Most people use the jack up the truck, paint and scribe the tire system. Well, I'm going to show you a fast way to do it. You drive the vehicle in just like we've done before. You roll it to a stop. Take a rag and clean off the front edge of the tire. Take a small piece of either masking tape or duct tape and stick it on the side of the tire. Then make a dot on the tire. Go to the other front tire and put masking tape and a dot on it the same way. With one measuring tape, you measure from this dot to the other dot. Then you drive the truck forward until this duct tape shows up on the back side of the tire. Measure from dot to dot. And the difference between this measurement and the front measurement is the toe in. It's a quick, fast way to do it that does not require you to jack up the truck so you get a good measurement. Thank you, Dan. We've moved around to the right side of the truck here in order to show you some of the under the hood measurements. The right side's a little less obstructed and it'll be easier for you to see it. Two of the measurements we need to make under here, Dan, are whether the axle's square underneath the truck and what the caster readings are.
Okay.
All right. Caster is the tilt of the kingpin. Let's make believe this is a kingpin. Forward or backward under the truck. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay. In order to measure caster, let's make believe this is the axle and this is the kingpin. When the axle is manufactured, the kingpin is made so that it's at a perfect 90-degree angle to the axle. The axle pad that the leaf spring sits on makes a good measuring surface. If that pad is tilted up in the front, the kingpin is tilted back. If the axle pad is tilted down in the front, the kingpin's tilted forward. So you can read the caster measurements by reading the spring pad. That make sense?
Yes, it does.
Good.
How do you measure that?
Well, we use this angle gauge, and if we set it on the axle pad, it will tell us the readings of the kingpin, forward or backward. Now you have to make sure you don't confuse it. The kingpin is also tilted in and out. We're not measuring this, which is called kingpin inclination. We're only measuring caster, which is the forward and backward measurement. Kingpin inclination is built into the axle, and there's no way to change it without bending the axle, or as some companies like to call it, correcting the axle. Have you had any experience with corrections?
Yes.
Did it work?
No.
Oh, well, we won't do that then. Okay. The other thing we need to discuss are caster shims. Caster shims are a tapered shim that fits between the axle and the leaf spring, and this is what puts the tilt in the axle. If you put it in with the thick side to the back, you're putting more caster in the axle. If you put it in with the thick side to the front, you're putting less caster in the axle. Now the important thing you look for when you go to a truck is if the same shims on both leaf spring stacks. I don't really care what's underneath there as long as it's the same on both sides. Occasionally we'll find a truck with one shim on one side and none on the other. And sometimes if it's been an alignment shop or repair shop, sometimes they'll find on one spring stack it's with the thick side forward, and on the other spring stack it'll be with the thick side back. And I'll guarantee it won't make your truck handle or ride very good.
I see.
The measurement that you actually do is done with these gauges, and we can set the gauge right on the spring pad of the axle in order to get a measurement. But your base measurement to determine whether the floor is tilted or not comes off the top edge of the frame. So if you take a frame reading and compare that with the axle reading, the difference between the two of them is what the caster in the axle is.
I understand.
Okay?
So your main concern is with the tilt forward and back of the axle and not the in and out?
That's exactly right. The in and out can only be corrected by bending the axle, which voids a warranty. The forward and back can be done by changing a shim.
I understand.
Okay? Now, if you got good eyes, you can use this gauge, set it down there, and you can adjust this red dot to wherever that white line is on the gauge. And then you can lift it out and read it. If you have a problem with that, you can attach a piece of square tubing to it, put the square tubing right on the axle, and then with a creeper you can go underneath the truck and you can see the needle real easily. Okay?
Okay.
Because it's not sitting up on top of the axle where you can't get your head up there. Or if you're a real old guy with tired eyes and bifocals, you take this digital deal, put it on the axle, let it set for a couple of seconds so that it stabilizes, and then it has a hold button. You push the hold button and bring it up and you can read it without having to bend your eyes and bang your head underneath the truck.
Now that shows 3.9 degrees. What should the reading be?
There is no standard reading. Some trucks come out of the factory at 2 degrees of caster, some at 3, some at 4. Mack likes to run them at 5 and 6. From our experience, it really doesn't matter. 2 degrees of caster is plenty for a conventional truck with power steering. If it was a manual steered truck, I'd probably run it at a half a degree of caster. But I've seen them run it high at 5 or 6, and if that's where the factory wants to set it, I run them and it really doesn't affect tire wear. And that's about all I worry about on caster. Mainly that it's the same on both sides.
If you have the different readings on both sides,
You better fix it.
it's corrected by the shims.
That's right. For this part of discussion in camber, we have to understand what camber is. Camber is the inward or outward tilt of the top of the tires. As long as the axle is set fairly straight up and down, you don't have a problem. In order to change camber, you have to bend the axle. And if you bend the axle, you void the manufacturer's warranty. Our experience has been that if the kingpins are good and the wheel bearings are good, normally the camber is so close to zero it's not a big problem. But if you suspect you have a problem, you take the angle gauge that we discussed earlier, put it against the side of the wheel, and get a reading. If it's anywhere close to zero, and if the wheel on the other side's anywhere close to zero, you probably don't have a problem. Now, if you're an old guy like me and you have a hard time reading those real fine lines, get your digital gauge out, put it up against the side of it, and read the big numbers. That's all there is to camber. The last measurement we need to make underneath the truck, underneath the hood of the truck, is determine whether this axle is sitting square under the truck, straight across, or if it's skewed one way or the other. In order to get that dimension, there's two things we have to do. First, we measure from the axle to the bottom of the frame on both sides of the truck to see if the truck is leaning one way or the other. If it's sitting nice and level, then the next thing you do is measure from the axle to the front edge of the frame to determine if it's set back in a correct manner. Now, the first measurement we're going to do is from the bottom of the frame. You bump the tape up against the bottom of the frame and measure to the top of the axle. You see it's 14 inches. you would make that same measurement on the other side of the truck. If they're within a half inch or so of each other, the truck's level enough that you don't have to worry about it. The next measurement you make is from the front edge of the front U-bolt, right where it goes into the axle. And from there, you'll measure to this grease cert right on the front spring hanger. Measurements from those two dimensions will tell you if the axle is set back. In order to get that measurement, you simply bump the tape up against the front of the U-bolt and measure it right to the grease cert. You'll notice that it's 25 inches. If those two measurements match within a 1/16 of an inch, the axle's in square. If it's off by more than a 1/16, you'd loosen the U-bolts on both sides of the front axle, put a bottle jack underneath one of the leaf springs and lift it until it's just got a little bit of clearance, and then move the axle by playing with the slop in the center pin holes. You set it back down, remeasure it, make sure it's right, tighten her down, and it's done. That's a setback measurement. Well, folks, we just finished walking from the front of the truck to the back of the truck. It only took us 4 days. We had a blizzard. The truck we were working on left. The one we got to replace, it's been running in the snow, so it's dirty. And Dan tried to wash it, and what happened?
My pressure hose broke.
Well, welcome to the real world. But we're going to finish doing the measurements on this truck, and don't worry, they'll measure out the same as we did before. Now, the next measurement we need to do is centering. We want to know if the axles are centered underneath the truck side to side. In order to do that, we're going to use a straight edge and a tape measure. We hold the straight edge up against the side of the tire, but not against the bulge at the bottom. We measure from the frame to the outside of the bar, and this gives us a distance. You do the same measurement on the other side of the truck. If the two measurements are the same, the axle's centered. If they're not the same, you have to center the axle using the tracking rods on the air ride suspension. Now, we feel it's an important measurement because the closer we get it centered, the better results we get. Now, does this make sense to you, Dan?
Well, Mike, I've been told by some alignment people that it doesn't make any difference if your axles are off center, just as long as the distance between the two is the same.
I've heard the same thing. But we do get better results this way, and the best explanation I can give for it is if you mount a motor off center on the back of a boat, the boat will go in the opposite direction.
Right.
So the more it's centered, the better a boat runs, and we get the same results here. That's why we spend the time centering axles. The next thing we're going to measure is thrust angle.
Okay.
But right now, we've got to switch places. Cale, you got an aluminum bar for me? All right. Thank you. By thrust angle, I mean, are the axles aimed straight, or they aimed to the right or to the left? See that?
Yes.
Okay.
Now you want both axles headed the same direction.
That's right. But you have to start by measuring one of the axles. So we're going to measure this one. In order to measure it, we use the string and the tape measure. Now I need you to go up front and flip that hood up for me so it's out of our way. Okay? All right. Now I'm going to take the string and I'm going to hook it on a handy bolt underneath the truck here. Just any bolt that'll hold it. Then we're going to bring the string across the center of the tire. And we'll bring it on up to the front. Okay, Dan. Once we've got the string up to the front, we're going to use this top center of the rim in order to get our measurement from. As we bring the string in until it touches both front and back sidewalls of that one axle, we get a dimension on the front here of 4.5 inches.
I can see that.
Okay. It doesn't matter if you measure at the top or at the bottom. It just depends on how many obstructions you have back here, steps, mud flaps, and things in your way. But you should get the same 4.5 inch measurement.
We do.
Okay. Once you've gotten that measurement, then you'll set up and measure the other side of the truck exactly the same way.
Okay.
If you get the same 4.5 inch measurement on both sides, then the axle's aimed straight.
I see.
But if that measurement over there is, say, 5 inches, and this measurement's 4 inches, then the axle's going to the right.
Is there any particular setting, a set measurement you should get?
No, because the width of the tires will change and the width of the axles will change a little bit. It'll all vary a little bit. As long as the dimensions are the same, that's what you're looking for.
Now, if these axles are off, how do you adjust those?
You adjust them with shims. Now, for example, on this Peterbilt, I brought along a Peterbilt shim. That 1/16 of an inch thick shim will change that measurement on the front of this truck 3/4 of an inch.
A 1/16 inch shim will change 3/4 of an inch on the front axle.
That's why it's so important that you get it right, because it'll push your truck 3/4 of an inch sideways every time it goes its own length if it's wrong, and it wears the tires off. So you need to measure it and get it right.
Okay.
Okay? Very good. Okay, now we've measured where the front drive axle is going, which is the thrust angle. And now we need to determine where this axle is going compared to this one. In order to do that, we're going to do a tram measurement. Billy Joe, I need the tape. Thank you. Now, the measurement is very simple. We measure from the back edge of the front rim to the front edge of the back rim and compare this measurement to the one on the other side of the truck. Now, we've done this a lot of different ways in the past. I bet one that you're more familiar with is with a big tram bar.
Yeah, I've seen those tram bars. Why don't you use them?
Because people put things like this on them and you can't get to where you need to get to measure the thing. We used to take these caps off and measure that way, and we got frustrated with it. Then we started experimenting with other ways of measuring. One was to hook the tape measure on the rim and measure to the other one. But we found the flange edges on the rims varied from rim to rim, and unless they were all four exactly the same, we wouldn't get good measurements. Then we tried measuring from mold mark on the tires, but different manufacturers have put the mold marks in different spots, so that didn't work. We finally found that if we use the edge of the rim, the one surface that's uniform on all tires, on all rims, you could get a good measurement, and we got good consistent readings. Okay? Now, we measured side to side on this truck. We've determined that it's square or not square. And now it's important that you be able to visualize what effect this has on the truck. Billy Joe, I need to tape the bars. Thank you. There's one. Now, where's my other one? I got my bars. Now, let's make believe that this is the front drive axle and this is the back drive axle. Your tram measurement compares the outside measurement on this axle with the outside measurements on the other side. If this side is wide, then you have a scrub angle like this. I'm exaggerating, but you see what I'm talking about?
Yes, that would cause a pull.
That's right. The truck will always go to the side where the two measurements are the closest. It'll try to run that way. Now, to visualize this, imagine a nice square oil can. If you roll it straight, that square oil can will roll straight, right?
Right.
But if you take a tapered Dixie cup and put it on the ground and you roll it, it'll always roll toward the short side, right?
Right.
Well, that's what a tapered or a thrust angle on an axle does, okay? A scrub angle on an axle. When you have the opposite scrub angle, the vehicle will go the other way. This is why it's important that you get these squared up to within a 1/16 of an inch.
That's your maximum?
That's the maximum. Now, you used to work for Mack, right?
Right.
What was their tolerance on it?
3/8 of an inch.
And 3/8 of an inch will guarantee to give you a pull and have a tire wear problem. So we work to specs a lot tighter than that. If we do it, we get good results. Make sense?
I agree.
Okay. To measuring on the rear end, you have three different measurements. You have thrust angle that's used with a string. You have centering that you use a tape measure to measure. And you have a tram measurement that you use a tape measure to measure. If you set all these right, you wind up with a good setup on the rear end. Okay, for the next part of this, we need to imagine that these dish rims are really the spoke type rims. Now, when we measured this truck, we started by finding out where this axle was going, and we used the strings to do it. That depends on a very straight and smooth sidewall mount. The spoke rim doesn't mount as straight, so we can't use that method. For this purpose, we're going to have to use a tram measurement. If Dan will hold this on the front edge of this rim, we measure from the front of that rim all the way up to the steering axle. This gives us a length measurement on this side of the truck. Then we compare this length measurement with the other side of the truck, and that helps tell you whether that drive axle is square to the truck or not. Does that make sense, Dan?
Yes, if we're measuring from the steer axle, then that means that steer axle has to be mounted in there square.
That's right. That's why we measured it first before we went to the back end.
I see.
Now, once you've trammed this axle in square, the front drive axle in square, then you tram the back axle in, and you've squared up the whole truck.
Okay.
Okay? What we're going to cover very briefly is how to measure trailers. Now, I'm saying it's going to be brief because really trailers are just another set of tandem axles, just like on a tractor. It doesn't matter if they're a set of close set tandems or spread, or if it's a sliding tandem set. You measure them the same way. You need 3 tools to do it with. The first is a straight edge, the second is a tape measure, and the third is a ball of string. We should have some string around here somewhere. There it is! All right. String. Now, the first thing you do is put the bar up against the tire, just like we did with the tractor. Measure from the frame out to the bar on both sides to make sure that the axle is centered under the trailer. You do the same measurement on the front drive or trailer axle to make sure that it's centered. Once you're sure they're centered, then you can use the string to determine where this axle's going. You hook the string on a convenient bolt or hook underneath the trailer. Bring it around the tire, just like we did on the tractor, only instead of going to the steering axle, you measure right to the side of the trailer. Now, I usually measure right at where the landing gear or the dollies are, so I'm measuring the same length on both sides of the trailer. You bring it in until it touches the tire and see how it compares to the side. If it's the same on both sides, the axle's aimed straight. Once you've determined where the front axle is going, then you come back, use your tape measure, and do a tram measurement from the front trailer axle to the back trailer axle, just exactly like you did on the tractor. All the rules for scrub angles and everything else all apply on trailers just like they do on tractors. There's nothing really mysterious about it. The most important thing to remember is that you have to bring the trailer in straight and roll it to a stop so that the suspension sets itself just like it does when it's driving down the road. You can't back the trailer in and try and measure it because everything is set in the wrong direction. Bring it in straight, use the 3 tools, measure center, string the front axle, tram the back axle, and you've set up a trailer. Well, we had some fun doing that, and I hope you got some laughs out of it. I want to thank Jeanette and Kim for providing some beauty to what would have otherwise been a very dull operation. I want to thank BTI Special Commodities for the use of their shop and their vehicle. We've shown you the visual aspects of how to measure the truck. We covered toe, caster, camber, steering axle setback, drive axle centering, thrust angle, and tram, which are all the basic measurements that we've found need to be done in order to get good tire wear. There's a lot more that can be said about alignments than what we've talked about today, and a lot of it is written in the book that we've got. Beyond what's written in the book, there could be volumes more. But what we've described and what's written in the book should cover 95% of the problems that you'll run into to do alignments. If you have more than that, give us a call. We'll be glad to talk to you about it. It's the common man's way to do alignments. We know it works, and if you'll use it, you'll get good results.